So good morning. I'm Roseanne Faust. I'm the president and CEO of SAMCETA, and I also serve as the deputy chair of the Redwood City San Mateo County Chamber of Commerce. We're here today, my partner in crime, Amy Buckmaster, the CEO of the Redwood City San Mateo County Chamber of Commerce, and we want to thank all of you for being here. Before I go into our prepared remarks, there's two things that I would like to ask from the audience this morning. Out of immense respect for the stage that I'm standing on and the corporation that has been in our community for a very long time, I'd like us to take a moment of silence for CEO Mark Hurd. Mark Hurd and the Oracle Corporation have been huge partners of the Redwood City and the greater San Mateo County community for many, many years. And we are all in deep sadness with his passing. The second area that I wanted to focus on is to acknowledge a company who has been in Redwood City over 100 years, because their CEO is retiring at the end of December, and that's Dave Lavelle and BKF. And I want to welcome their new CEO, Greg Hurd. So thank you, Greg, for all that BKF does for our community. I'd also like to acknowledge our elected officials that are here with us today, both past and present. I'm going to read the names very quickly, and so I ask that you hold your applause. If the elected officials, as I read your name, could just stand up so that we can acknowledge your hard work for the community. We have Mario Rendon with the Office of Assembly Member Kevin Mullen, representing Kevin Mullen, Zach Ross, representing Office of Assembly Member Mark Berman, Juan Ragoza, the Controller of San Mateo County. We have Mayor Ian Bain from the City of Redwood City. We have council members Janet Borgens, Vice Mayor Diane Howard, Council Member Shelley Mazer, Giselle Hale, making sure I have everyone. We also have Mayor Sam Hindy from the City of Foster City, Council Member Marie Schwung from the City of Hillsborough. We have Council Member Ellen Kamei from the City of Mountain View. Thank you, Ellen. We have former Mayor of the City of San Jose and Hispanic Foundation of Silicon Valley, Ron Gonzalez. Thank you, Ron. What's very interesting, Redwood City is such a strong and frankly powerful community. In the audience today, in addition to our current mayor, there are former mayors, Danny Gasparini, Jim Hartnett, Jeff Ira. So thank you to all of them for their support and their contributions to the business community. So we're fortunate this morning to deliver an exciting program for all of you. We have fabulous speakers. We have Charlie Doherty from Wells Fargo and Dennis O'Malley from Caliva. Where, except in the Bay Area, are you going to have on one stage economy and cannabis? Kind of cool, folks. That really warranted kind of bigger applause. Let's just, just saying. But we can't do this in a silo. That's what makes San Mateo County so great. So we have amazing sponsors. Our presenting sponsor, and I want to thank the team at Wells Fargo, and in particular my board member, Sunil Pandya, with Wells Fargo and his team. So thank you. We have our program sponsor, Perry Interactive, and John Perry. Perry is a Wonderman company. Our corporate sponsors, all of our corporate sponsors, thank you and thank you. Oracle, Randy Smith and Chris Weber, BKF Engineers, Todd Adair, his team, Greg and Ashley and Simon and the group, Bohannon Development, Bob Webster, City of Redwood City, our city council, our city manager, and our city administrative team, who is fantastic. So that's Melissa Stevenson Diaz and the group at the table. Kilroy Realty, Eileen Kong, Lane Partners and Mark Murray, Lucille Packard Children's Hospital and Sherry Sager, Recology San Mateo County, Mario Puccinelli and Tammy Del Beni, San Mateo Credit Union, Wade Painter, Sequoia Hospital, a Dignity Health member, Bill Graham, Stage Rigging, Jeff Gilbert, Stanford University, Steve Elliott. All of our corporate sponsors, please stand up so we can acknowledge and thank you. We have our business sponsors, Heritage Bank of Commerce, Clay Jones and Frank Bartaldo, and Carl McClellan, Norm Book Jr., and our tech sponsor, the Sobrato Organization, and Peter Sy. Thank you. Would all of them please stand up? And we want to specifically call out the team here at the Oracle Conference Center, because frankly, none of us would be either standing up here giving presentations or being able to handle any of the tech aspect of this. So that is Rita, Teresa, Alistar, Fred, Anoy, and Alex. So thank you to the Oracle team. So what I'm going to ask is, you have cards on your table. There should be note cards out there. That is for Q&A. How we're going to manage today is Charlie Doherty from Wells Fargo will be giving the economic presentation. Then we're going to have Q&A with Charlie. So please write your questions down. Then we're going to introduce Dennis O'Malley, the CEO of Caliva. And with Dennis, it'll be, again, written questions and answers. So with a large group like this, in order to get as many questions as possible, it's a moderated Q&A. So please get your questions and hand them in at the side. You have Charlie and Dennis's bio in your program. So everyone has a program on the table. These are two very accomplished individuals. They have amazing backgrounds. They are doing great things for our community from a corporate and business perspective. And they do so much on the philanthropy side too. And I'd like you all to think about that as you hear their remarks. Business isn't just about the bottom line. It's about so much more than that. And these companies, the corporate sponsors, our speakers, our organizations from Samsita's perspective and the Chamber's perspective, we all work together to get things done, to do them together, and to bring in the greater community. So it's about business and philanthropy, education, opportunity, and it's all of us in it together. So I'm going to bring up Charlie. Charlie, it's great to have you.
Thank you. All right, thank you so much. I want to start off with a prediction. 49ers are going to beat the Seahawks 57-3. You heard it here first. All right, let's talk about the economy. I want to start off and point out that in July, we reached a pretty important milestone in our economy. In July, the economic expansion turned 10 years old. That's an important fact. That's an important milestone that we've reached. Because 10 years, it's the longest expansion that this country has ever seen, that our economy has ever seen. And right now, 10 years in, it looks like we're going to have a few more years of that expansion. This is great news. So 10 years in, the economy seems to be doing well. This is great. But it hasn't exactly felt like a 10-year expansion, right? It hasn't felt like 10 years have gone by in terms of the economy. And it hasn't felt that way because while 10 years is the longest we've had, it's also been the slowest growth we've had. So 10 years in, we're averaging about 2% GDP growth. And when I talk about the economy and economic growth, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about GDP. So the 2% that we've been averaging for the past 10 years, if you go back and measure the prior expansions that we've had, that's about half the pace that we've been averaging in prior expansions. Let me give you an example. The last time we grew even close to 10 years was in the 1990s. We grew about 4.5% during that time, average per year. 2009 to right now, we're averaging just over 2%. So while it's been the longest, it's been the slowest. So the number one question I hear is, 10 years in, when's the next downturn? It's been 10 years since we've had a recession. And my answer is, well, even though it's been a long time, because it's been so subdued and slow, a lot of the imbalances that normally crop up or accrue throughout the life of an expansion, because it's been a stable expansion, we're not seeing any of those. Overall, the economy looks pretty good right now. There's a few soft patches, right? There's some things going on. But overall, the economy looks good. The economy is in pretty solid shape. So what happened last year? The economy grew close to 3%. That was a good year last year. Almost 3% relative to the 2% we've been averaging. It doesn't sound like much. It doesn't sound like much, but on a $20 trillion economy, going from about 2% to 3%, that matters. Last year was one of the strongest years of the expansion. Almost 3%. Just barely below 3%. So why are we downshifting right now? Because we're cooling off. We're slowing down a bit. Why is that happening? Well, I'm going to tell you why it's happening. What's happening in our economy, and the economy is a big, complicated thing, but how I explain it is the economy is basically two things, two big things. It's consumer spending and it's business spending. Right now, business spending is coming down. It's moderating. It's slowing. Business spending is slowing. The other big thing is consumer spending. You go out and buy a house, a car, go out to eat, consumer spending. That's doing great. That's doing fantastic right now. The reason we are forecasting growth to continue right around 2% for this year and next year is because the consumer is so strong. People are going out and spending money. What underpins that? Why do we think it's going to continue into the future? Well, if you have a job and your wages are coming up, you're much more likely to go out and spend. So right now what we see is labor markets being very, very strong. Very strong. So we have a strong labor market, wages coming up, that drives the consumer. The consumer is lifting the economy to about 2%. Business spending, however, business spending is coming down. That's why we're decelerating. That's why we're slowing noticeably. And why is business spending coming down? If I had to pick one word, it's uncertainty. Uncertainty is the dominant theme in today's economy. It's trade, it's tariffs, but it's everything. It's political, right? Remember we had the federal government shutdown? 21 days, longest shutdown we've ever had. impeachment. We got an election coming up. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. And yes, it's trade. Yes, it's tariffs. With regards to that, though, recent headlines are actually pretty optimistic on that front. And if you go back and see what happened with NAFTA 2.0 or the USMCA, we have a preliminary agreement there. We have a preliminary agreement with Europe. All those signs point to this administration does want to have a deal. So hopefully, as we move forward, as the uncertainty that is causing businesses to say, hey, we don't know the rules of the road. Why would we make substantial investments if we don't know how our supply chain is going to look over the next few years? We'll do whatever it takes. We just need to know the rules of the road, and we just don't know what those rules are right now. So we're not going to go and make capital investments. Capital investments is business spending. That's why you have business spending coming down. Businesses just don't know the rules of the road at this point. There's another reason, and this doesn't get enough or as much attention. We have a slowing global growth environment. Growth around the world, especially with our major trading partners, is slowing much more noticeably than in this country. So this matters, right? Because our economies are integrated. They're connected. A lot of the U.S.'s major companies, the biggest companies in this country, have a lot of sales in Asia and everywhere around the world. So when their economies slow down, that hurts companies that are headquartered in our country. It hurts hiring. So what you see in this graph here, that top line, that's basically China. You see a big slowdown in China. China recently just posted their slowest rate of GDP growth in nearly 3 decades. That bottom orange line, that's basically Germany. Germany is essentially in a recession right now. All of our economies are integrated. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is about an hour from BMW's largest automobile manufacturing plant in the world. BMW's biggest manufacturing plant is not in Germany, it's in Spartanburg, South Carolina. All of our economies are integrated. So when the global economy is slowing down, it's natural to see some of that come back and hurt us. But overall, the U.S. is slowing down too. The U.S. is slowing down, but we're still doing pretty good. Like I said, we're slowing down from a pretty strong place. Again, last year was one of the fastest or strongest years of this expansion. The big impact is in manufacturing. Manufacturing is at the center of the slowdown. And you can see it in this graph. This graph shows the ISM Manufacturing Index. It's a very important indicator for economists. I guarantee you, Fed Chair Jay Powell is constantly looking at this graph. This graph shows manufacturing sentiment has come down sharply over the past year. And it's for those 2 reasons I just mentioned. Yes, tariffs and trade, but the slowing global growth environment is having a big impact on the manufacturing sector. So you see that blue line is very elevated, and it's come down sharply, and it's fallen below 50. That line is 50. If you fall below 50, you're in contraction territory. And why this matters and why Jay Powell pays attention to this graph is that while manufacturing doesn't have quite the same influence in this country's economy that it did 50 years ago, you can see how well that it lines up with that brown line, which is just real GDP growth, economic growth. So manufacturing is only 12% of the economy now. It used to be 20. But you can see when the manufacturing industry slows, we get a slowdown in overall economic growth. And that's what's happening. The good news is the latest numbers for this ISM actually look a bit brighter. So while it's slowed down, much like it slowed down in 2015, if you go back, follow that blue line back a little bit, it has slowed, but it's still consistent with roughly 2% GDP growth, which again is about where we've been averaging since 2009. It's all business spending. That's what's slowing down. And you see it in the orders of capital goods, capital investment. There's been a clear slowdown. And it's been slowing, yes, because of trade and tariffs. That's exacerbated the issue. But this lines up pretty well with the slowing global growth environment as well. So when you have a slowdown in capital orders, that means manufacturers are seeing fewer orders. That's why manufacturing is slowing right now. Again, if you look at more forward-looking indicators, they're beginning to look a little bit more bright. So while we're slowing down, it doesn't look like we're going much into negative territory. So again, the economy is slowing down. Fed Chair Jay Powell definitely looked at that last graph. So what's been happening with interest rates? Why is the Fed cutting interest rates? I'm up here telling you all that there's nothing to worry about. The economy's fine, solid shape. But on the other hand, you have the Fed cutting interest rates. I thought the Fed only cut interest rates when the economy was doing poorly. That's a good point. That's a good point. But what's happening with the Fed is they see the 10-year long recovery. They see the 2% GDP growth that we've averaged. It's been slow. They see the slowdown in the manufacturing and slowdown abroad, and they think to themselves, there's a real danger that the economy could slow down and even go into negative territory if we don't do something. So the economy looks good, but let's get ahead of the curve. Let's get ahead of what's happening abroad and in the manufacturing sector, and let's bring down interest rates a little bit. So they've cut rates in 3 of the past 3 meetings. They're trying to give the economy a booster shot. They're giving the economy the flu shot ahead of flu season. Everybody got their flu shot, right? That's what's happening. So we don't see the Fed bringing down rates to 0. We don't think that's going to happen. We think the Fed, maybe has another rate cut in them, depending on the outcome of what happens with the trade negotiations. But this is where we are. Another reason the Fed's probably bringing down rates a little bit is because what else happened? The yield curve inverted. What's the yield curve? The yield curve is essentially the difference between a 2-year Treasury yield and a 10-year Treasury yield. When the 10-year goes below the 2, that signals that you may have a recession coming down the road. This is why financial markets went into a tizzy a few months ago, because the yield curve inverted. But if you do a deeper analysis of what's actually happening, the 10-year part has come down. It's fallen very sharply. The 10-year Treasury yield has come down. And why has the 10-year Treasury yield come down? Is because we've had a global economic slowdown. Investors view the 10-year Treasury, the U.S. 10-year Treasury, as a safe haven. So when you have slowing global growth abroad, investors looking for a safe haven, and they all pile into the 10-year Treasury, that brings the interest rate down, and it brings it below the 2-year, which is mostly follows what the Fed does. The Fed controls short-term interest rates. That's why the yield curve inverted. And this caused a lot of concern. It's caused a lot of concern because every time we've had a downturn or a recession, if you look back 6 months to 2 years, what you see is an inverted yield curve. There's no great explanation why, what happens to cause a recession, but you tend to get that. And it's happened over the past 50 years, it's happened every single time. It's sent some false signals. It has sent a lot of false signals. Every time you get an inverted yield curve, you don't get a recession. But every time we've had a recession, we've had the inverted yield curve. But as I mentioned, all the external factors that are having an impact on the 10-year Treasury, that leads us to believe that maybe this type of thing does not have the same type of predictive power that it once did. And now you have the Fed bringing rates down, the 2-year come down, 10 years going back up a little bit. The yield curve is not inverted anymore. It's steepening out. There are a lot of bright spots. The labor market is a huge bright spot in our economy. We've had over 100 consecutive months of positive employment growth. Over 100. Last year, we were averaging somewhere above 200,000 new jobs. We are slowing in this respect. Now we're averaging about 175,000. But this is still a very strong number. You need somewhere between 80 and 100,000 new jobs per month as of the replacement rate as people come into the labor force. So this is if I was grading this is a solid B. Over 100 consecutive months of employment growth, it's pushing our unemployment rate down. Unemployment rate is 3.6%. Last month, it was 3.5%, which is the lowest it's been in 50 years, since 1969. We actually think it can go even lower. Why do we think it can go lower? Because we have a big thing happening in this country right now. Demographics. We've got a lot of baby boomers, not so many Gen Xers, a lot of millennials. But baby boomers are dropping out of the labor force. They're dropping out of the labor force. It's having an impact on our economic data, which is why you always have to look and consider the impact demographics are having. What this graph shows is labor force participation. People engaged with the labor force, people out there looking for jobs or having jobs. That blue line is the top line number that you would read in the Wall Street Journal or hear about on NPR. It's been moving sideways. It hasn't shown the type of recovery that we would expect to see with, over 100 straight months of employment growth. But overall, account for population. Look at 25 to 55 people who should be working. We've had a lot of improvement. A lot of improvement. But we're still just getting back to prior peak levels. So it's taken 10 years just to get back to the low point of the last cycle. That means there's still people out there on the sidelines. That means they can join the labor force. That means you can see more improvement. But more importantly, we're seeing rising wages. We haven't for most of this recovery. It's taken 10 years to just get back to about 4% wage growth. 10 years to get to 4% wage growth. 4% is about what we averaged last cycle. The prior cycle was 5%. So it's taken 10 years, but it's coming up. As the labor market tightens, as more people get jobs, and there's fewer potential candidates to hire, that brings up wages. So this is a good thing. This is a good thing. Inflation. This is another reason why the Fed can actually bring down interest rates, is because we haven't quite seen the type of inflation that many would expect. We're just below 2%. That's a healthy rate of price increases. That's a healthy rate. And it's actually lower than that. So the Fed wants to see 2%, and it's been below that. But we're nowhere near the 3 or 4 or 7% inflation that we've seen in our past history. Nowhere near that. So inflation, it's not a concern right now. Because that would be the one thing that could potentially also derail consumer spending. Again, how do we think, or how do we know that the consumer is going to continue to go out and spend? The consumer is 70% of our economy, which is why it's so important. But how do we know in 2020 and 2021 the consumer is going to continue to go and spend? Well, we've got job growth, we've got rising wages, and for the most part, income growth has exceeded consumer spending growth. So this is what this graph shows. What you want to see is that blue line, which is income growth, above the brown line, which is consumer spending growth. So you want to be, across the economy, you want people making more money, but spending within what they make. And that's what's been happening. So we have a very strong saving rate. People are saving. That will let them spend for the next few years. Very big positive. Another big positive is the housing market's come back. Home prices continue to be positive. But what happened last year? Well, the housing market slowed. It slowed in California, mostly in Southern California. Around here it was a bit more positive, but overall, mortgage rates, which follow the 10-year Treasury yield, went up to the sky-high level of 5%. Existing home sales slowed. That's that blue line. Slowed noticeably, and it slowed because of demographics. The biggest demand segment right now in the housing market is at the entry level. There's a shortage of entry-level homes. These folks are much more price sensitive. So even an interest rate movement of 4% to 5%, which sounds small, that has a big impact on the housing market. So what's happened since? Well, mortgage rates follow the 10-year Treasury. The 10-year Treasury has come down. Housing has come back. We still need to build more housing. We still need to build more housing. I'll say it one more time. We still need to build more housing. Right now, nationwide, we have about 1.5 million housing starts. We should be, we have about 1.2, 1.3. We should be at 1.5. That would be a healthy level. So we're seeing positive growth here. We're going from 1.2 to 1.25, and it's a very slow, steady increase, but we should be at 1.5. That's a 200,000 to 300,000 deficit. This is why home prices keep going up, is there's an inventory problem. People aren't moving as much as they used to, but we're also not building a lot of new structures. And we know this in San Francisco, right? We actually are doing a lot in the multifamily front. So look at that orange line. That's multifamily starts. There's a lot of apartment construction, and there needs to be more, but you just see the explosion here. And look at the other line, which is single family. Still very subdued. It's very, very hard. San Francisco is probably the toughest market to actually build anything in because of the high costs and the regulatory burdens. But overall, there actually has been a lot of progress on this front. It's very expensive here. I don't need to tell you all that. But if you look at the number of affordable listings on Redfin right now, Number of affordable listings, if you make $100,000 a year, only 2.5% for San Francisco. California is the top 7 or 8 on that bottom left. If you build more housing, this helps this issue, all types of housing. And it's hurting population growth. There's still a lot of people moving to San Francisco. There's still a lot of people moving from San Francisco, but we're seeing more people leave too. We're seeing more people leave. So that bottom right, that's population growth. Those orange bars that are negative, that's people moving for other surrounding areas, in the Central Valley or other places. Dallas, Austin, Denver, Salt Lake City, Raleigh-Durham. Tech, big driving force still. This is the percent of employment in the Bay Area of tech jobs. So as a share of the economy, tech continues to dominate. Continues to dominate. It's the driving force. And it will be the driving force, no matter what happens. All the great universities here, companies want to be here, companies want to cluster. There's a war for talent, and the best talent is coming out of the great universities. This is why this drives the economy and will continue to drive the economy. But overall, San Mateo has picked up noticeably. San Mateo County is growing about 2.5%. So California is growing about, this is employment growth, California is growing about 1.7%. That's about where the U.S. is growing. San Mateo has picked up to about 2.5% over the past year. Noticeable growth here. San Francisco County has come down a bit. It's not shocking to see. There's always a movement within the Great Bay Area. There's some movement, Oakland or San Francisco, San Jose. But right now, San Mateo appears to be benefiting from some of the higher costs of San Francisco proper. So overall, the economy is doing great. We're slowing down 3% to roughly 2%. And overall, I think this 10-year-long expansion is going to go on for another few years. Thank you very much, and I'll take some questions now.
Thanks so much, Charlie. So you have to love this audience. I'm going to ask the most important question first. What will be the spread in the 49ers over the Seahawks?
Oh, I said it's going to be over 30 points, I think. It's not even going to be a contest.
So who's taking bets out there? Okay, we have a bet. We'll just go for it. So rapid fire questions.
Sure.
We're going to, so we can get through them all because this audience asks a lot. If we run into a recession or slowdown, how long will California lag with respect to the rest of the nation?
That's a good question because California, the last time, was basically the epicenter, right, because of the housing crisis. But if you look what's happening throughout California, it's done pretty well recently. It's done pretty well, like I mentioned just before, growing right around where the rest of the country is. But you see the strong growth in San Francisco. Los Angeles has slowed down a bit because of the transportation and logistics and more of a trade slowdown that the ports of LA and Long Beach are more exposed to. So you've seen some slowing there. But overall, the California economy appears pretty healthy, and more importantly, appears pretty stable. So how you judge how an economy is going to perform during a downturn is, economies that are one-sided tend to do worse, right? So Houston, which has a lot of exposure to the oil and gas industry, if there was a downturn, they might not do so well. But California is doing very well in expanding and diversifying a lot of the industries that are growing. Right, so I know the tech industry is big in San Francisco, but we have seen a diversification of employment growth. So it's not just tech, It's education and health, hospitals, universities, schools. It's finance. It's job growth across a broad array of industries. So when you see that, when you see broad-based growth, that means you're well set up to handle a downturn. So even if we were to slow down, I'd say the California economy would do quite well.
So for local, how is the climate for local lending for commercial and housing development? What do you think?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I'm not sure exactly about the local conditions, but what we've seen, because 10 years in, I think the lending climate, generally speaking, I think people are a little bit concerned about the duration of this expansion, right? So for lending, and you see what's happened to home prices, and you've seen what happens to commercial real estate prices, which are going up through the roof. So you've seen some more conservative lending, right? And for housing, it's been conservative for the course of this recovery. But overall, if the economy continues to do well, I think it'll loosen up a bit.
Thank you. How do you think wage increases impact business spending?
I think that's a good question, because it's a balancing act if you're a business, right? Because business spending is spending on capital investments, but it's also spending on labor, right? So if you have wages coming up, it's a new situation for businesses, which have, for the most part, dealt with lower than average labor costs, especially coming out of this expansion in the early goings. So it's one of those things that when I go around and I talk to a lot of businesses, and it's probably their number one concern, because when you have 3.5 or 3.6% unemployment, you still need the talent to expand. But then again, you have to be able to retain the talent that you already do have, and within a cost line that would allow you to remain as profitable as you can. So it's a balancing act, and I think companies are continuing to come up with creative ways to do that. You see, offering better things at work, where you have gyms and volleyball courts and food. Yeah, so those are benefits that aren't necessarily showing up in the wage numbers, but it's something that companies are using to sort of attract and retain their talent.
Well, how do you see the outlook? You mentioned a lot about our consumers. We're all consumers. Mm-hmm. How do you see the outlook of the retail sector, given strong consumer spending today and into the future?
I think the retail sector, it's gone through a few years of pain, broadly speaking. You see a lot of malls shutting down, a lot of retailers declaring bankruptcy. But overall, I'm a little bit more bullish on the retail sector because of that fact. That's the number one thing, it's consumer spending. Also, we probably had a little bit too much retail going up. So if you look at retail square feet per person, it's like 2 or 3 times that of any other developed country in this country, in the US. So coming up, there was probably going to be some correction there. So that's what you're probably seeing. Also, the Amazon effect. That's undeniable. Mm-hmm. But a lot of retail and a lot of strong economies across the country are actually doing well, because they're integrating other things that consumers like to do now, right? You can't order your dinner. Well, I guess you can order your dinner online now, but people still want the experience of going out to dinner, going to a concert, So retail developments that are incorporating these types of experiential type of things are actually doing quite well. So they're kind of shifting their mix, their tenant mix, mm-hmm. if you will. So you have a little less retail, maybe more apartments, office buildings. It's all about maximizing foot traffic. So I'm a little bit more positive on retail.
That's fascinating. So we had 2 to 3 times the space per consumer mm-hmm. in the retail sector. Okay, that's a stat to take away. How much of the ISM slowdown is attributable to temporary factors like trade tariffs, and how much is attributable to slowing global growth?
That's a good question, and I think it's both. You see the big slowdown in the ISM, which is a measure of sentiment, really starts to come down a few months after the tariffs came into effect. And the tariffs are impacting the global economy too. So the economy, although it started slowing before this all started, the tariffs are kind of making things a little bit worse. So it's sort of, it's probably an even split, but they're sort of, joined at the hip there too. So it'd be difficult to disentangle each of those. But both are clearly factors.
When do you think we'll get a trade deal with China? Or is that more of an if? Or who knows?
I think we will. I think if you look at what's happening now, which is, we have this phase one deal that still needs to be signed, but that's a positive indicator that we're moving in this certain direction. And I do think we'll have a trade deal. What's involved with that is a different story, but you look at, we have an election coming up that's going to play a factor, I believe, and the fact that we have the phase one in place, and the fact that we have the deal with the Canada and Mexico and Europe, although preliminary. I think that's an indication that the administration would like to have a deal on it. So I think that's going to, and it makes sense, right? It makes sense for us to have a new trade agreement with China. It makes sense for China, it makes sense for us. So that, at the end of the day, is going to drive this, and that's going to make us, sort of come together.
So I'm going to wrap two questions into final question. It's kind of a several-parter. Are tax cuts sustainable? Are they good for the economy? And how will the presidential election in 2020 affect the economy?
Yeah, that's
just let me throw it all at them.
So the tax cuts were a positive for the economy last year, and to some extent this year as well. Lower marginal tax rates, put more money in the consumer, towards the consumer. They went out and spent. That's a part of the reason why we had almost 3% growth last year. So it was a short-term stimulus. Longer term, it is going to add to the deficit. It's going to add to our debt. Last year, our deficit was almost $800 billion. This year, it was over $1 trillion. These types of deficit numbers are numbers you would normally see, during the depths of a recession, not when we have 2% GDP growth and 3.5% unemployment. So that's absolutely an issue. It's a longer-term issue. But it's something we're going to have to deal with over the next 5, 10, 15 years. Because, again, demographics aren't going to help us out in this respect. With all the baby boomers retiring, it's just going to get worse. So it's something we have to sort of come up with a solution to.
So, Charlie, are you willing to come back next year after, and I'm already making the ass now, figure I'll get it in because he's awesome, after the 2020 election, and we're going to see where we're at?
Absolutely.
Yay! Let's give Charlie a big round of applause.
Yeah. Thank you.
Now it gives me great pleasure to bring up the CEO of the premier cannabis manufacturing company. Actually, I'm going to say in the country, Dennis O'Malley.
Sweet. Thank you very much. So now I see why I'm going after Charlie. Charlie, really enjoyed the presentation. If we do get into recession, I think I might have an industry to get us out of it. So I'm super pleased to be here. A lot of thanks to Roseanne and Amy for having the courage to put somebody up to talk about a federally illegal business. So unless you didn't read the program, we are going to talk about something that's federally illegal. So if you need to pause and leave or put earmuffs on, I understand it wouldn't be the first time. But really thrilled and honored to be here in front of you with so many civic leaders who we've known and respected, who've built up what we certainly believe is the best economy in the world. So I'm here with my colleague, Hirsch Jane, who runs government affairs for us, to talk a little bit about the political climate of Caliva. I defer to Hirsch as to most of the number stats and what the trends are. Hirsch is bringing myself and our chairman of the board, Carol Bartz, out to Washington, D.C. next week, where for 3 days we're going to be meeting senators, maybe Pelosi, maybe Larry Kudlow, around what the impact of the federal illegality of cannabis is. So it's a super hot button on a national stage. We're in constant contact with Gavin Newsom, go Broncos, as well as within San Jose with our mayor Sam Liccardo, go Bells. So the super timely in terms of having this conversation here, and again, thanks so much for the support from Roseanne and Amy. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of the national level, the high level overview of what's going on from a federal level, bring it down to California, talk about San Mateo County, talk specifically about Redwood City, give you a little bit of a context around Caliva, who we are, what we believe in throughout. So when Roseanne first called, she said, hey, Dennis, I have great news. I really want Caliva on the stage. And I said, that's awesome. She said, is Joe Montana available? I said, no, I don't think Joe's available. Joe was one of our first investors. She goes, no problem at all. Carol Bartz is a tech titan. Can Carol come? I said, no, Carol's actually traveling. Though she's our chairman of the board, she loves to do it. She's like, okay, we'll settle for Jay-Z. And I talked to Jay yesterday. He just couldn't make it. So I'm their fourth choice. Caliva was started in 2015. We're headquartered in San Jose. We have 6 locations in the Bay Area. We are one of the top cannabis companies, both in California and the nation. We're beyond thrilled to talk about the company that we keep. Joe Montana really reached out to us based on an intro because he had a passion around what he saw from his fellow players on the impact of opioids, and his belief that a natural path to health and healing was a much better path to go to. So he has a strong passion around that. Carol Bartz, who needs no introduction, is a very, very engaged supporter of what she sees as plant-based solutions of improving people's daily lives. She uses it all the time when she goes golfing at Sharon Heights Golf Club. And she couldn't be a better leader for us in a cannabis company, giving us credibility. We're super proud for the 700 jobs that we've created. We just were profiled in a Vox profile this morning around the better pay, benefits, stock options that we provide are over 300 drivers, many of whom who drive to San Mateo on a daily basis. It's a much better job and career than an Uber or a Lyft type of economy. As Roseanne said, we take a lot of pride in our civic and our community engagement. We partnered with Ben & Jerry's on a Clear My Record program that helps out expungement for non-violent criminal records for cannabis. My wife is a criminal defense attorney here in San Mateo County and has been for years. And she's part of the PDP panel. And it's been something that's also been near and dear to her heart too. And then certainly we take a lot of accountability and responsibility, but we're thrilled to have brand awareness, not just across California, but across the nation with a deep, long-term, multi-year partnership with Jay-Z. So what do we do? What does Caliva do? We can throw out all stats to you around how we're the largest indoor grow in all of California and the nation, and that we're the #1 seller of products in California. We are focused on California because of the state and the federal laws. But really, at the end of the day, the Caliva why we are in existence, our North Star is that informed consumer. There's a macro trend of people who are looking for 2 things. One is you want to take back the empowerment and choice of your health and wellness. You want to be the one to choose what goes into your body. You want to know what goes into your body, whether it's what you drink, whether it's what you eat, and it's your medicine. We found that doctors, when you go for an outpatient surgery and they give you 50 Vicodin, we usually didn't ask questions. We take the bare minimum amount, and we put it in the medicine box, and we hope that little Johnny doesn't find it, before they go out to high school. Little known fact is that the majority of heroin addicts start from legal prescription drugs. It's a terrible consequence in terms of the number of opioids in this country. There's just under 200 deaths per day from opioids in the US. So this groundswell of people who want to take back their health and wellness. And when they do that, they're looking for plant-based solutions. They say something natural is probably better than something manufactured, synthetic. I want to really go back to a plant. So the Schedule I drug, of which our doctor, David Yeomans from Stanford, the leading pain researcher in the world, he can't work on a plant. He can work on cocaine. He can't work on a plant because it's a Schedule I drug. There is no research around cannabis. It's a plant. There's nothing synthetic, manufactured, unnatural that we do with it. However, for thousands of years, people have been using it for pain, sleep, anxiety, energy, and recovery. So our why at Caliva is to provide plant-based solutions for you to integrate that into your daily life so you can live your best life. We want to see a reduction in opioids. If there's a reduction in nicotine and alcohol, we're happy with that too. We are completely non-judgmental of how you integrate cannabis or CBD into your daily lives, but we found that plant-based solutions can absolutely improve people's lives. So what's the problem or the difficulty within cannabis? The theme of this talk is that there is irrational exuberance by everybody around cannabis, but mainly around those who believed that they could profit from it, or they could drive taxes from it, or they could drive revenue from it. It's those who are jumping into the green rush in the industry, it's regulators, it's everybody. I'll give you a couple examples of the problem. Our controller drives on a monthly basis $1 million of cash to places like the city of San Jose, to places like Oakland for state taxes. Before I found out that he was doing it on his own, he now has our security guard or armor guards going with him. But when I asked, I said, Phil, how did you take all of that money to the city of San Jose? He said, my backpack. I said, all of the hundreds fit in the backpack for $1 million? He's like, no, I had to take a Trader Joe's grocery bag too. So we're one of the leading taxpayers in San Jose. Costco's right behind us on that. But we go through unnatural acts to be able to manage cash. It costs us over $1 million a year to manage cash. Consumers have to pay in cash. Now, a lot of our business is business to business, and it's not all cash. We do have a bank that works with us. I cannot disclose who they are, but I will never switch from them. We put $50 million into the business to found it. We raised $75 million, and we're now raising $150 million. I will never switch from that bank. They took a risk on us, and they are a banking relationship with us. They have my business forever. Full stop, bar none. And they're a great bank, and they're a great name. So when you look at the unnatural acts of what we have to do, think about taxes. If you are getting pain, sleep, or anxiety, and you are going to Caliva as a consumer, you walk in, you have to go to an ATM, you pay $3, you get out $100. You get $64 worth of product because you are paying your normal sales tax in San Jose, 9.25%. You're paying a city tax of 10%, and you're paying a state tax of 15%. It's irrational exuberance as to why the consumers who are choosing a natural health and wellness option are being taxed at a 35%, 36% tax rate to be able to do so. Because there's a belief that there's some price elasticity around cannabis, and regardless of the number of taxes, that's going to continue to grow. The other part is just regulations. It's really, 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 really hard and expensive to run a cannabis business. There were 397 licenses on Monday that were suspended, and we're talking mom and pops to big businesses because they were not able to meet the regulations of integrating with the state's track and trace system called Metric. It's hard. We have multiple data scientists working with 4,000 transactions a day to be able to do this. So it's not easy. As a national perspective, there's a groundswell of a movement of people and states who are saying and standing up and saying, I would rather have natural health and wellness options than opioids. It is completely prevalent across the United States. If you look at the Pew Research trends, the acceptance of cannabis as a choice, over the last 20, 30, 40 years has just completely shot up. We see things from Cowen's research reports that says millennials now are choosing cannabis over alcohol at an increasing rate because of no hangovers, because in legal cannabis, there's never been a death, and they see these things, whether it's alcohol or opioids, et cetera, about how, what the impact can be, whether you're using it medicinally or whether you're using it recreationally. So across the country, continued support for cannabis. Federally, it's very, very difficult. There is a 280E tax within cannabis that essentially says that you cannot depreciate anything against your P&L. So the unnatural acts that you have to do to put everything you can into COGS, your cost of goods sold, to be able to reduce your tax burden, think of a 10 to 15% tax hit on your bottom line because of this 280E tax. When California goes out and Gavin Newsom says, hey, we're right in line with this other states in terms of taxes, the cities have an ability to put a tax on it. Redwood City has 4% tax rate on cannabis. California is one of the most highest taxed rates around. It's a tough inside baseball industry. There's CBD, there's hemp CBD, there's THC, there's milligrams, there's testing, there's 10 grams, 5 grams. It's hard to understand what it is. Today, there is a hemp-based CBD, both program and plant, that is legal. And the hemp farm bill, run by people who grow hemp out in Kentucky, Mitch McConnell and others, said that part of the cannabis plant is legal. But the other part of the plant that produces THC is not legal, even though to the untrained eye, it's almost impossible to see. And when you look at these grows, they're shutting down hemp-based grows, thinking that they're THC grows. It's tough. It's tough for regulators. It's tough for everybody around it. But there's changing regulations around what is allowed and what is not allowed. And it's confusing on the federal level. It's confusing on the state level. It's confusing for an operator like us, where we can sell in our San Jose dispensary THC, but we cannot sell hemp-based CBD. There is a state ordinance called AB 228 that is hoping to rectify that. What is top of mind for me, I have two daughters who go to high school at Sacred Heart. I have a 5th grader in St. Charles. Is a illegal and legal market. When we have such high tax rates, black market thrives. Love that. There's no sign, Better Business Bureau, that says this is a legal cannabis company and this is an illegal cannabis company, that this is a legal cannabis product and this is an illegal cannabis product. People don't know. And when you have an illegal black market, the illegal black market cuts corners. So all of the vape illnesses, sicknesses, and deaths that you've seen have come from the illegal market not going through state-based testing and getting this out into the market. At Caliva, we want so many more regulations. We want the tax dollars to be able to go to regulations. We want to ensure that nobody underage gets access to any cannabis. Your brain's still forming until you're in your early 20s. There's no reason that somebody under 21 should ever be trying cannabis. But most importantly, keeping our streets safe is to eradicate the black market and unsafe products. Everybody asks me, when is it going to be federally legal? And I'd say 2 things. One is that we don't want it to be federally legal. As a business owner, we love the moat that surrounds us in California. And if it goes federally legal tomorrow, Nestle put together a $1 billion medical food fund. Medical foods has everything to do with cannabis. Coke has a VC accelerator just focused on cannabis. Kraft Heinz just did the same thing. They just made investments in cannabis. So all of these large CPG companies, Genentech has probably more synthetic cannabis patents than anybody on the planet. Everybody's waiting in the wings. So when it's not federally legal, it's really good for Caliva. So we still prefer it not to go federally legal. There are people like Bernie Sanders who are trying to drive federal legalization. It's not going to happen, and it won't happen. It won't happen soon. My mom was so proud. She's a Bernie Sanders supporter, and she said, "Dennis, I'm rooting for you. I'm voting for Bernie Sanders." I'm like, "Mom, you know Bernie hates people like me." So I was cracking up. My mom's great. She's always good intentioned. So there's a couple of things that Hirsch and I and Carol are trying to drive and influence, and at least make a lot of the senators factually aware of. The hottest topic today is the SAFE Banking Act. There's no other piece of legislation that will have a greater impact on the black market, on taxes, on a booming industry to help Charlie's inverted yield curve maybe revert. Would that be what it's called? So the SAFE Banking Act essentially does a couple things. It will allow banks to be able to invest in cannabis companies. There is no growth equity in cannabis. There's a lot of people who go out and get friends and family money, high net worth individuals, real estate developers, investment, et cetera. When you run out of that money, there is no Sequoia Capital, Goldman Sachs, there's no SoftBank. There's a cannabis implosion in California right now because we have hit that point where these companies are going after growth equity and they have no capability to get that. We need institutional investment. We need debt vehicles. We need to be able to not use cash. So if the SAFE Banking Act passes, we eliminate the need for cash. That completely changes around the safety profile, completely changes around the profitability for these companies, allows transparent banking relationships, ultimately allows facts to be able to go on the NASDAQ, et cetera, but provides a legitimacy to an industry and a safety to an industry that's not going away. So there's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube. Cannabis is here to stay in the US, in California, and it's really up to us to be leaders in terms of the regulation around it. The second step is the STATES Act. So the STATES Act will allow states to be really sovereign as to how they manage cannabis without the threat of federal intervention. So it would give California an ability to execute better against their cannabis initiatives than they have today. And today, the federal government, though they have the ability to come in and shut even Caliva down overnight, in general, just from federalism, they've generally respected states' rights, but making that formal will be a very big deal. So in California, we represent the largest cannabis market in the world. I know a lot of people aren't that shocked about it if you go to San Francisco or if you go to LA. I know nobody in here is ever a regular user or ever tried it, so I won't ask for a show of hands. But it's a major industry, and the largest growing demographic are seniors. It's seniors who are saying, I have a medicine cabinet full of synthetic opioids. Why would I do that when I can use something natural? Now, it's really hard to figure out what to use and how to use it, and we want to be able to educate that, but boomers are the #1 fastest growing demographic for us. Irrational exuberance. Newsom and the California legislature thought that and forecasted that the cannabis industry was going to boom under their regulatory environment, and they were going to get $700 million in tax receipts. Hirsch, is that right? $700 million? And Hirsch, what did they get? 330 is what they ended up getting. Irrational exuberance based on a 15% excise tax and everything they're doing. The cannabis market in California is not growing. This is the legal market. Guess what the other market's doing? Growing. It's not like demand for cannabis is going away. So the taxes, the lack of licenses throughout the state made it very, very hard for legal cannabis to actually function. There's no funding. You can't go to a bank. You can't get a bank loan. If you're illegal, you don't need to do testing. You don't need to do child-proof packaging. You don't need to pay taxes. So that part of the business continues to grow. The legal part is not growing. What we did differently at Caliva is we went after higher standards. We went after a notion that said we are going to control our supply and demand chain. That has made all the difference in terms of our growth. Because of the different business interruptions from others, we've thrived at it. We've been very, very fortunate in terms of the amount of funding that we've been able to take in and the backers that we have. It's completely changed around our business. We continue to be a leader and we'll continue to do that. But if you think about it, the numbers that I mentioned to you, that's over $200 million into our business, not counting our revenues. This is a very capital-intensive business to be able to do that right. We talked about this week about the number of people who lost their licenses because they didn't have the ability to actually invest in their track and trace and compliance systems. So while California had said, hey, I would like cannabis to be legal within the state, when it goes to the cities who have the sovereign capability to be able to say whether it should be in a retail facility in their city or not, 75% of those cities said, not in my backyard. that I would not like a retail location there. So it's a massive issue in terms of access to cannabis for people. When I speak with people like the boomers and I walk them through what we're doing, the stories that I get behind closed doors when they're comfortable is, I have to drive to San Francisco. I have to go to San Jose. I only get it when I fly to LA. I only get it when I go to Oregon. So the accessibility in terms of being able to have a informed conversation with an educated wellness consultant around what is best for me is hard to do. You don't want to first time just go online and say, I want to try this, this, and this. You generally want to talk to somebody who's a trusted expert who knows what they're doing, to have a conversation with somebody that says, here, I'm dealing with this type of arthritis. What do I take? I can't go to sleep. I can't stay asleep. What do I take? Not having retail, in real life retail, prevents that. So this is a licensed retailer in LA today. This is how people go get cannabis. We're asking people for pain, sleep, and anxiety to go drive in an industrial zone area, ask them to park in a parking lot that's nowhere close to the dispensary. They go up to a security guard with a gun, give them their ID. They walk into a place. They go to a bud tender where they make $20 an hour, and their THC tolerance is this high. And we ask them, here's my rheumatoid arthritis. What do I take? It's completely broken in terms of anybody wanting to go into one of these dispensaries. So within San Mateo is the same thing. Every voter votes for it. I absolutely want to be able to have people enjoy legal cannabis, except there's not one retail facility south of San Francisco to San Jose. Not one. Zero. But everybody voted for it. I want it legal. I absolutely want it legal, but not in our city. Redwood City, irrational exuberance, said, I absolutely want it, and I'm going to have delivery licenses within Redwood City, and we charted it out, and we believe that that every delivery company is going to make $5 million and a 4% tax rate. That's going to be $200,000 to the city. There's no way on God's green earth that any delivery company is going to do $5 million based out of Redwood City. Caliva does 1,500 deliveries a day out of San Jose and out of Brisbane. Brisbane's a 0% tax rate. Consumers are going to buy from our website at a 0% tax rate and go into Redwood City every day. That completely hinders a great mom and pop delivery company in Redwood City who are trying to build a business and create jobs. So what do we think the future of cannabis looks like? Well, we think the future of cannabis is about health and healing, not just about happiness. It's about people integrating lotions. It's about people wanting to go to sleep. It's about people wanting to live a balanced life. And they're really looking for health and wellness options. In Redwood City today, specifically, you can go to Ease. They're a partner of Caliva. If you go to Ease, it's actually Caliva's the back end. We actually deliver it for you. You can go to caliva.com. We're going to deliver it to your business, your house, in less than an hour. You can go to Harvest Bloom, a great Redwood City licensed delivery center who is trying to compete with taxes and illegal people and big behemoths like us without the ability to get any funding, without the ability to use a NetSuite or an Oracle, because services like that don't work with cannabis companies because they can't, without the ability to go to a bank because they don't have the leverage that we do. It's very, very hard for small companies to survive in cannabis. What's the future of cannabis? This is our store in San Carlos. It's a store called Well by Caliva. It is a non-licensed retail center where we sell only hemp-based CBD. We originally thought that there was going to be some pushback by the city of San Carlos, where I've lived for 19 years, to have a store like this. I give a lot of I'm very impressed with the mayor, Mark Obert, and the city council for completely leaning into this. And they had said that we want to ensure and make sure that we absolutely know what this is and we support this. The senior center at the Elms down the street absolutely loves being able to walk down the street, to be able to go ask somebody a question, 12 to 15 minutes new consumer spend, asking what type of plant-based solution is right for me. This is a clean, well-lighted place, staffed by yoga instructors, staffed by people who have spent time understanding what pain, sleep, and anxiety is, selling all hemp-based CBD products. If you'd like to upgrade to THC, you can absolutely go online. But the future of cannabis is on San Carlos Avenue, next to King Schwan. It took over from Sophie's Apparel that had been there for like 30 years. So we really want to try to drive this. It takes a tremendous amount of investment. We'll continue to invest to be able to do this. We are obviously very much in investment mode. We're very much in job creation mode. But again, thank you to Roseanne and Amy for having the courage to be able to provide just a place for us to be able to talk to you about the reality of what cannabis in Redwood City, San Mateo County, California, and the nation looks like. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. And I have a few questions here, but there is a person in the audience that I want to thank on behalf of Amy and I, because Dennis wouldn't be here today without her support, and that's Danny Gasparini. Danny, thank you. So Danny met Dennis. Then Danny arranged that we visited Hirsch and Dennis down at the San Jose facility. It was absolutely fascinating, 100,000 square foot facility, and we were like, please come and speak to our economic outlook. Mary, the economic presentation was something new to help educate our San Mateo County business, elected, labor, nonprofit, and as I throw my pen, our education community. So thank you, and thank you.
Yes, thanks, Danny.
So we have a few questions. Seems like the gouging of governments in taxes or fees regarding cannabis-specific sales could be construed as money laundering. Thoughts? Oh, that was a hell of a question. I figured I'm going to start with that one.
Yeah, I won't take the bait on that. But the reality is it is this irrational exuberance by people modeling things out and believing. Somebody said, hey, you know what? They're going to buy it anyway, and if they're going to get high, they're not going to care what the taxes are. It's not who the consumer is. The consumer is somebody who is deathly afraid of taking their OxyContin after their doctor gave that to them after a surgery, and they feel terrible about walking into these places. They feel like they're going into a plastic surgery center or a casino. They know it's legal. They don't want somebody to see them, and it's not a great environment for them. So. Nobody wants to pay 36% taxes for their health and healing.
Dennis, can you share the story about the veteran who came when Caliva opened and stood in line that you shared with us?
Sure. So in California, it went recreationally legal, meaning that all you needed was an ID to be over 21, January 1st, 2018. I was with my family in Newport Beach, flew up early. I didn't think it was going to be a big deal. All of a sudden, I started seeing these texts from our store manager. Lines were down the street. When we got there, there was somebody who was in a walker, and I'd asked him, and I said, wow, you must have gotten here pretty early. He said, I slept here overnight. I said, oh, my God. And he was probably in his mid-60s. And I said, well, you slept here overnight. Where'd you come from? He said, I drove 4 hours away. 4 hours away? I said, what? You've never gotten cannabis before? No, never. I always thought I was going to be tested for it. I'm a veteran. I never wanted to do anything illegal. I said, well, what are you going to buy? He's like, I have tremendous arthritis in my knee. I am afraid to take any opioids. I've never taken anything from it. I heard cannabis lotion may provide help for my knee. So a guy drove 4 hours, spent the night in the car waiting for the day to go legal. We did a video about him, everything else, to try to find some relief for his knee. VA didn't help him find cannabis, and the fact that we were able to give him some relief was huge.
One of the questions had to do with ID, and you just mentioned it. Can you just repeat to the audience about the ID needed to actually go to Caliva?
Yeah, so you have to be 21, and if you're going to Caliva.com, we're going to ask you to upload your ID, and it's as secure as anything else built out there, but we only deliver to those who are 21. When you go into any of our licensed stores, you have to be over 21. There's some places, like we were opening a Bellflower store. I'm flying down there today. If you have a medical card, you can be 18, but most municipalities have 21 as the age.
Money. Have you ever entertained the idea of cryptocurrency or possibly creating your own currency for the industry?
Yeah, we get that question a lot. I've never actually met a consumer who knows or would know how to pay for anything with crypto. So I have a Coinbase account and everything else. I have no idea how to do it. No, we're not going to do that. And I know there's things like the ICOs to go public and do all those types of things. If you met my boss, Carol Bartz, she would use some adult language about an ICO. And we are holding strong until we can go public on the NASDAQ.
I love that. How many in the audience use cryptocurrency or have bought it or have participated? Just out of curiosity. Just okay. It's interesting because my 19-year-old also bought some for a reason I'm not going to share with you. But the folks that raise their hand are much younger than us, so that is interesting. In a household in which parents use cannabis for medicinal purposes, is there any likelihood that their kids will think it's okay to use for recreational purposes?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my wife was nervous about telling our daughters. When I finally did, my oldest daughter is 15, a sophomore at Sacred Heart, said, "Dad, can you tell me the difference between what your products are and vape pens like Juul?" Because a lot of my friends use Juul. So that was a healthy conversation. My 14-year-old said, "Dad, that seems like a great business opportunity. Can I get a job?" And my 9-year-old at the time said, "Dad, you said it's a plant, right?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, how can you make a plant illegal?" And that really sunk to me, and I couldn't explain to her why a plant was illegal. So I would say that the use of cannabis, like alcohol, is somewhat non-judgmental. There are cannabis drinks at dinner that I will drink just like you drink a glass of wine. And I think having the conversation, at least with our teenagers, around moderation and that there's no excuse to be able to use cannabis while you're under 21 because your brain's still forming and those types of things, is at least the conversation that we have. It's so prevalent in high schools these days that if you're not having the conversation with your kids, somebody else is.
If there is just what you just said about plants not being like trying to explain that. If everyone walks out of the room today, when they do, what is one thing you want them to remember? One thing about everything that you've said, because this is the group that is going to make decisions on the future.
Yeah, I would say that the one takeaway around this is that the vast majority, and we're talking 80, 90% of the people who look to cannabis in order is for pain, sleep, and anxiety. Make my pain go away, help me go or stay asleep, and help me have a balanced, normal day. That's it. And they're ashamed to do it. They're a little nervous. They don't know what to ask the questions. And I think it's on all of us to be able to allow people who are looking to be empowered to take back their own health and wellness and to be able to choose plant-based solutions. We have to be able to enable that. We can't look at that as an opportunistic way to be able to increase taxes. And by the way, it's not just increasing taxes. If I went out to, I'm sure a lot of people here are in insurance, development, banking. Everybody believes there's massive amounts of margins in cannabis, and they jack up the rates. Our friends at Oracle have a 90% gross margin. I have about a 26% gross margin. The gross margins and the profitability in cannabis, nobody's looking at that. But the rates that we have to pay on anybody for anything, for any service, is super high. So I think if we truly believe that a natural solution is better than opioids for the majority of those things, then we have a duty to make it easier for consumers to be able to choose that.
Thank you. Dennis O'Malley, Kaliva.
Thanks, Roseanne. Thank you very much.
So there are 3 people that I want to thank and acknowledge, because Amy and I could never, ever do this without them. And that's Larissa Okinata from Samsita, Maggie Fahey from the Chamber, and Felicia Vasquez from the Chamber. Thank you, thank you. So, our upcoming events. The 51st Progress Seminar is going on the road, folks. Amy has worked with Julie Lynn Rupp from the Central Labor Council since last year's Progress Seminar in April to try to settle the labor issues down at the Hyatt Regency in Monterey. She worked. Julie worked. It wasn't possible. So the Chamber made the choice to support labor and support our union friends. We are going to the Hyatt Regency up in Santa Rosa, Hyatt Regency, Sonoma County. So save the date for that. Our awards, it used to be an awards dinner, which is why I paused. It is now the Chamber's Awards Luncheon. It is on January 31st at Dominica Winery in San Carlos. Fun new location, fun new format. And our golf tournament, Birdies for Business, is September 21st at Stanford. Save the date for our innovators, March 16th. We will keep you posted on the location, which we know, but we're keeping it under wraps for the time being. And then more than the bottom line, this is the Samsita show that highlights all the great economic engines and drivers and businesses that we have in San Mateo County and talking about their philanthropy. So thank you for attending today. Thank you to Oracle and to Wells Fargo and to Caliva. What an awesome event, folks. You feeling good? Thanks and have a great weekend. And thank you. We're entering Veterans Day weekend. Could I have all of our veterans stand up, please? And our active duty military. I am very proud today because my daughter is active duty U.S. Naval Intelligence, and she's with us here today. So. Thank you. Have an awesome weekend, and we really appreciate all your support.